In today's episode, we're talking to online child safety expert Jessica Chalmers, so you can understand more about keeping the children in your life safe on social media. You're listening to JFDI with the two Lauras, and this episode is a little bit different. We're welcoming our very first guest to the show, and we're going to be talking about a different side of social media. Now, if you enjoy this episode, we would love to know. So please, wherever you're listening, rate and review, because that will help us to make the show even better and help us to get it in front of far more people.
We usually talk about social media marketing and business on the show, but today we are talking about online safety. With 3 children myself and 8 nieces and nephews, I am at the point in my life where I am starting to worry about how to keep my kids and other kids safe on social media. So I'm excited to welcome our very first guest to the show today to get some tips. And even if you don't have children yourself, it's likely that your clients do. So keep listening because you'll pick up some tips that might help them.
Welcome to the show, Jess. It's so lovely to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sure that there's plenty of parents who are pretty concerned right now with the state of the internet and how they can keep their kids safe on social media. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. But before we get into it, I'm really just curious about how on earth you got into this line of work. Why did you decide to do this? So spill the beans, tell us your backstory. We are here for it.
Okay, so as you know, I am a social media manager and I was looking after some local businesses' Instagram accounts. And I was aware, as we are as social media managers, about the power and influence that social media has over us, which is amazing when you're a business and you're sucking in your ideal customer. But I had this niggly feeling in my head that this is less good for children and young people. So this sort of niggle continued. And then I watched an amazing documentary called, it's a Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma. And this documentary explores this very subject about the power and influence that the online world has over us. And I realised very quickly that I was not equipped to keep my children safe online. Had a bit of panic, spoke to a friend about it and mentioned to her, I want to learn this stuff. And at the time, I was running Instagram workshops for businesses as well. And she said, Jess, go and learn it all. Make a workshop, I'll pay, we'll all pay. So that's how the idea was born. So from then I went on a journey and I've trained with some of the world's leading child safety online experts. I've attended conferences and webinars. I've read so many books and listened to more podcasts than you can possibly imagine. And with that information, I've taken the best bits and I've kind of packaged them up into workshops that I run for parents, businesses and schools. So that's the story.
It's brilliant, isn't it? Because as a busy working parent and acknowledging that social media is a minefield, and that's for someone who works in the field, it's quite daunting to say, right, I need to find out about my children's online safety. It's quite a daunting thing to think about. So the fact that there is now you there that people can come along to your workshops and stuff and learn, and you've done that hard work for them, the time consuming part, is brilliant.
Yeah, well, thank you. This is what I kind of thought about it in the way that when I had my babies and they were little, I went to a first aid course. Now I knew I could have found that information online, but I didn't want to. I wanted to go to someone. I wanted to spend 45 minutes there. And I wanted someone to tell me everything I needed to know. So I kind of think of my workshops just like a kind of a first aid course almost for the online world. It's just packaged information that's simple and easy to understand and practical.
I love that. I think and obviously I don't have this issue because William can't access the internet, but I think a lot of parents that I know kind of bury their head in the sand and they don't want to venture into that world because they're just a bit nervous of it. So without scaring our listeners too much, why should they be worried about social media? What are the risks to their children from being on social so that we can kind of address those first and then understand how we can overcome them?
Okay, so I want to say straight off that I am pro-technology. I often talk about the risks, of course I do, but there's loads of benefits. And our children are lucky that they're growing up in this world, this amazing tech at their fingertips. But of course, with anything going online, there are risks. And the kind of general risks that you get online, which of course are also translated to social media, there's a risk of cyberbullying. There's a risk of them coming across inappropriate content, whether that's porn or hateful content or, dreadful things like self-harm, suicide content. That's all out there, unfortunately, on social media. And then there's the risk of online grooming, which unfortunately has risen. It's risen a lot since the pandemic. The FBI recently recorded that there's over 500,000 predators online. So that's 500,000 predators online. So the more children that went online, especially in lockdown, unfortunately, the more groomers are online. So that is a problem, and that's something that we must be aware of.
And it's scary, isn't it? Because when I was young, my parents would warn me about don't walk alone in the dark and all of that sort of stuff. Yeah. Whereas now there's so many more things you need to be aware of, isn't there?
There's also what I find really upsetting is, yes, those risks still exist for children who are out and about on the streets. Don't talk to strangers, blah, 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 don't get in people's cars. That's all still very true. But these risks are risks that can take place when they're in your home, when they're in their safe place. And that's what's worrying, isn't it? When these kids are sat on their devices, even next to you, they can be having conversations with people they naively shouldn't be having conversations with, or being, led down this path that we don't want our children to be led down. It is frightening.
It is frightening. And actually, I remember when I had my son, it was one of the things that really struck me, was that I just felt that awful feeling that now with, and this is when he was a baby, it was kind of playing in my head at the thought that a bully can follow them home. They can follow them into their bed, in the front door, up the stairs, into their bedroom. They're just, it's a constant, but we can, there's things that we can do to sort of mitigate these risks.
Yeah. And I think part of the problem, and I say this, and I know from this perspective, I'm in a fortunate position that I do understand pretty much all social media platforms. The only one I don't properly understand is Snapchat, because obviously I don't use it in a work capacity. But I understand the platforms and I understand how they work. And although I'm using it from a business perspective, I see kind of the parental controls that exist for parents and children. But I think part of the problem is, for the wider general public, especially the non-social media using parents out there, they don't understand how the platforms work, let alone what kind of functionalities there are that exist to protect their children. And it can be, I guess, quite overwhelming. I see it all the time with TikTok in particular. And I know this has happened amongst people that I know, in that their children go on and I want to be on TikTok, I want to be on TikTok, I want to be on TikTok. I get it. And so they say, okay, well, let's set up an account on my phone, as in the parent's phone, and then I can monitor what you're doing, which is fine. Obviously, that's great intention. But then they set up their TikTok account and they sync it normally to their mobile phone, which means then that I then go on, if I go on TikTok now, I can see TikToks from children who I don't have a clue who they are. But because that person has synced it with their mobile, and just think how many phone numbers we have in our phones. We have the builders, I use my phone for all my work contacts, the dentist, there's just so many different telephone numbers of people that you wouldn't want them to be able to see your children's content. Not saying there's anything wrong with builders or dentists, may I add. They were just examples. And I think that comes down to, we don't understand how these platforms work. And obviously, yes, if they had the privacy settings that other people couldn't see the content, that would solve that. But yeah, I'm constantly scrolling through TikTok and it will say from your contacts, and it's like a 9-year-old boy or 11. And so that could be happening across the board. And I don't know who these kids are. I don't know them. But I'm being exposed to these kids, and these kids are therefore being exposed to people in their parents' phones, and it's worrying. So in terms of how parents need to take the responsibility to educate themselves, but there are controls in place, aren't there, for a lot of platforms that parents can utilise? Yeah,
there are. And actually the social media platforms and apps, they do have parental controls. And I hate the word parental controls. It just sounds so controlling, and I think it's a terrible word. I haven't got a better one, by the way, but I think that's a bad one. But I kind of think if you think your child's old enough, that's one of the other things I think it's worth mentioning. If you think your child's old enough, most of these platforms are for 13 plus. And lots of children are going on, at say 8 when they should be 13. But bear in mind that there was a great article in the Times recently which was talking about this subject, that if your child then goes on to social media at 8 when they're meant to be 13, when they're 13, the algorithm thinks that they're 18. So you can only imagine the kind of content that's being fed to them then. So, so when you think your child's old enough to go onto social media, it's a time where it's a great chance for a conversation, to sit down, to go through the parental controls and kind of talk about why you're setting them up. It's a moment to talk about, we're making your account private so you can't speak to strangers, and that then leads to a conversation about grooming, or we're going to put in restricted mode, because then that means you can't have inappropriate content, and you can talk then about the kind of content that they might come across. Because for all the kind of parental controls that you put in place, your child's only got to walk to school or go to their friend's house and with their big brother or big sister who doesn't have the parental control set on, look at their phone, and they're going to see it anyway. So it's all about conversations, I think. Talk to your children about what's out there, what they might see, what they might come across, and then kind of explain to them what they would then do if that happens.
Yeah, I think I recently had to talk to a child because of something they were doing online, and they were basically slagging off their teachers at school, which I get, they're kids. Like, in my day we'll have done that, but it would have just been probably face-to-face conversations. But yeah, and they put it on TikTok, and they said, oh, it's fine, it's a private account, no one can see that. And I had to explain to them that nothing on the internet is private, and yes, it's a private account, but someone can screen record that and send it into the teachers, or show it to somebody and a screenshot. And so nothing, even if it's private, even if it's a one-to-one conversation in DMs on a platform, all of that in theory can be in the public domain very, very quickly. And I had to kind of explain that, and you could see the kind of penny drop. It's like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. They thought about, oh, I've got a private account, I'm a bit protected here, I can say what I want because I'm just essentially talking to my friends. But you only need one of those friends to show it to a parent, or one of those friends to just be annoyed with you one day and go, well, I'm going to show the teachers what you've been saying on TikTok, and that's it, it's out there.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because they just need to know that whatever, the moment they make their first post or their first comment, that the first step online is basically the start of their digital footprint, and that digital footprint is going to follow them for the rest of their lives. So just got to be, but that can be a really positive thing. Think about it, that could be a really great thing if they're posting really positive, great things about what they're doing. Then that's a positive digital footprint. But I think our children need to know that there's now, if they're going to go to university or they're going to go to school, there's admissions teams whose job is to look at our digital footprint. There's people there's people's jobs in companies, which is their job is to look at your digital footprint. There was a case in the class of 2020 at Harvard University where these boys they've worked so hard to get into Harvard University, and then the admissions team were looking through their digital footprint, and they saw some hateful comments that I believe were posted on Facebook. Anyway, that's it. Places are taken away, no longer at Harvard University. So I think that just goes to show you, if our children know that stuff, that's going to make them maybe think twice about what they post.
More people need to know that.
That's so true. I haven't actually thought that. Yeah.
I never knew that.
No, and I certainly haven't spoken to my children about that, because I suppose it's... You think of all the other things, don't you? Like, I think about the online grooming and the bullying, and I forget that actually the impact that their actions they take now can have a massive impact on them when they're older.
God, how lucky are we that we didn't have to deal with that, though? I probably would never have got a job.
I know.
Oh, gosh. I know. We're very lucky. We're very lucky.
So we sit down with our children. We feel like they're old enough. They set themselves up on an account. not using their parents' phone numbers as their setup.
Yep.
And away they go. And I think, yes, so I can see what would happen because I can see what happens in my house, and maybe I'm on my own here, but they're allowed access to something. You monitor it, and don't get me wrong, I monitor my kids' phones. I look at them every single day, but obviously you can't see what they've seen is the issue, isn't it, on a lot of these platforms. Yeah. And I can just see it play out that you say, yes, okay, finally I'll let you have TikTok, for example, because you've been bugging me for however many months. And yes, you have those conversations with them, and then you say, look, whenever you're on it, you need to be around me so I can see the kind of content, or I can hear the content. So you have to be sat next to me. Within a few days, the parent's in the room, but they may be concentrating on cooking the tea, for example. So they're not quite tuned into it. Then a week or so later, that child is sat in their bedroom, and you're not aware of any content that they're consuming. And what I think parents don't realise is how sensitive the algorithms are. And it only takes a child to loiter a little bit more on maybe a slightly controversial type of piece of content that is saying to TikTok, in this example, okay, show me more of that. So although when that child was sat next to you 2 weeks ago, they were just watching girls dancing, for example, or Fortnite videos, 2 weeks later, their whole content there could be served is completely different because of what the algorithm has learned. And obviously that can still be positive. That's not to say that in 2 weeks the content they're seeing is horrible, awful, pornographic. I suspect that's not the case, but I think parents need to be made aware of how sensitive these algorithms are on all platforms.
Yeah, and that is a big thing, because of course if a child is shown something shocking, let's say porn, or something hateful, or they're going to naturally linger longer because it's going to shock you. So you look at it, and therefore that is, then you're bombarded with more and more of that imagery, and before you know it, you're in a sort of porn rabbit hole. So I can kind of see how parents need to be aware, and that's where conversations happen, because you can't sit with your child on the sofa with them while they're on their phones. You need to guide them at the beginning, absolutely, but you can't sit with them, forever. And the same way, I really believe parental controls have a great place for younger children, because it gives them it allows them to explore the internet without, being restricted. But I think conversations are the key here, because if you can speak to your children about what they might come across, then at least if they ever do see that, they know then what to do. So it might be, let's say you're on Instagram, you can click the account and you can say, show me less of this. There's every account, every social media app has its own sort of way of hiding content. So I think it's just sitting down at the beginning, going through what they might see, what if they see that, what they're going to do, and just being very open. Because if you think your child's old enough to have a phone or be on social media, then they need to be old enough to have those conversations about what they might see, because it's out there.
Yeah, definitely. I think going back to what you were just saying, Laura, about the algorithms being really sensitive, a lot of my friends, if we go out for coffee or whatever, their children don't have phones, but they will give them their phone and they will go and then look on their phone. So then they are seeing that content that is made for adults, and they don't necessarily realise that. And they don't think about what they've looked at before. They think the kid's going to go and look for other things. And that's not how the algorithms work. So I think there's a massive piece of education there.
The content I see all the time on TikTok is how to contour my face. And weirdly, I see people taking pregnancy tests a lot. Like, I don't know what I'm obviously watching them because I keep seeing them, all these people like not getting a positive pregnancy test. Anyway, so I think this is what I'm seeing. And I forget then that everybody else isn't seeing this. Like, my feed is very, very much curated for me. So we can naively sit there and think, oh, it's okay, my daughter can go on TikTok because she will want to learn how to contour her face. I don't think she needs to learn about pregnancy tests at the moment. But, you know, so do you think, oh, it's okay because we're not exposed to that? Like, we don't see, you know, these awful challenges that we've heard about in the news. I don't see them because they don't fall into, obviously, the content that I have previously engaged with. So if I was to now go and try and engage with that kind of content, obviously I will then start to see it in my feed, but I need to know about it to go and find it in the first place. Yeah. So just because we see the type of content we see, our children can be seeing completely different content. Yeah,
it's really true. I remember when it was the terribly sad Molly Russell inquest in the news recently, and a lot of her suicide and self-harm content was fed to her from Pinterest. Now, if you look at my Pinterest account, it's full of autumnal crafts and birthday
interior
cakes.
Design.
You know, exactly, interior design. It's a very different, you know, and so as a parent, you can sort of. You can be. It's confusing, and there's absolutely no shame in not knowing how to do it, because, as I said at the very beginning, it is a minefield, and it's something we sort of need to learn, because this isn't something that we've grown up with. No. It's new to us, isn't it?
And I think, I honestly think, if you don't know how to use a platform and you don't understand the platform, then your children shouldn't be allowed to use it, and that's my opinion, and I'm sure there's plenty of people who won't agree with that. Like, my children will not go on Snapchat, because I've heard so much awful stuff about it, personally and professionally, and I don't understand the platform well enough to feel like I could monitor my children on it. So they'll just never, until I find the time to educate myself, which is not going to be anytime soon, and they're not old enough, they're not going to go on it, despite how many times they ask me. And I know not every parent is the same. And I know parents are, you know, they don't have the time, and they think, oh, well, what harm can happen? Let's just go and, you know, chuck them on Snapchat or what, TikTok or what have you. And I appreciate it's difficult when they say, oh, but everybody's got it. It's only me who hasn't got it.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah,
you know, I get all of that. But I just think parents need to take the time to educate themselves and have those open and honest conversations with their child. Because, like, some of the platforms I just think are awful, or can be awful places for kids.
So on that note then, when we know that some platforms are better or worse than others, have you, in your opinion, is there any platform that's like better or worse for your children to be on?
Oh, that's a tricky one, because they've all got something about them, whether that's a positive thing or a negative thing. So I personally don't think there is one that I would say is worse or better than any of the others, because, for example, with Instagram, you've of course got the whole self-esteem thing that a lot of girls face. There was a Facebook Files that came out a while ago which talked about how girls really did feel bad when they were on Instagram. This was Facebook's own research, how they did feel bad when they were on Instagram. It made them feel bad about themselves, because that's, I mean, even as an adult, I have to sometimes tell myself, come on, Jess, it's all smoke and mirrors. You know, you're seeing, this isn't a real life. This is a curated snapshot of someone's perfect day. It's not reality. And I think that's something that children, especially girls, can struggle with. And the filters on Instagram are so powerful. I did a reel quite recently, and it's gone bonkers, and it's literally me showing myself in a filter, not in a filter. And I think that's it just shows how clever they are.
Yeah, they are.
Really, really changes your face. So that's sort of Instagram. And then you've got Snapchat, which of course has something called a snap map, which, if you're not familiar, it's a map, and it shows you pinpoints exactly where you are, so you can show your friends, but also it can show show strangers. So unless that's set up properly, that's a bit of a clanger. And then you've got TikTok with, as you mentioned earlier, Laura, the challenges. Basically, just for people who don't know, a TikTok challenge is a challenge on TikTok which goes viral, and it could be doing anything. Now, the blackout challenge was children holding their breath until they blacked out, which has ended in death, has ended in people with brain damage. You know, it's just a disaster. But there's fun challenges, and there's silly challenges, and then there's really dangerous challenges. So with all of these things, you just got to be educated, and then you can make a choice whether you think it's right for your child or not.
Yeah. Now, this is going to be a really difficult question, but if there was just one thing you could tell parents to do to help keep their children safe online, what would that one thing be?
So my one thing would actually be three things. But if I had to really do one thing, then my one thing would be talk. It's really simple, but talk to your children. Talk to your children about the risks of online. So as I said at the very beginning, talk to them about what they might come across. Talk about grooming. Talk about inappropriate content. Talk about cyberbullying. Talk to them about it so they're armed and they know then what to do and if it happens. But also, don't just talk about the scary stuff. Talk about the fun stuff. Ask them, how, because the online world is so huge for children. Talk to them about, how was your day online? Like, what was funny? What did you see that was funny today? Oh, tell me about your game. Tell me about what you're playing at Roblox. We know we don't really want to know about Roblox, but talk about Roblox because your child is such a huge part of their life. They want to talk to you about it. And the more they talk about the good stuff, if it ever goes wonky, then they're going to talk to you because they're used to having that conversation. But if I got to have two more, then my other things would be screen grab, block and report. So you want to say that to your child until you're blue in the face and they're so bored of you. Screen grab. Teach your child to screen grab on every device that they use, whether that's a Kindle, a phone, a laptop, whatever it is. So if anybody ever sends them an inappropriate message, then they can screen grab that and they've got that evidence.
Especially on platforms like WhatsApp and Snapchat that have disappearing messages.
Exactly. It can go in a flash. And so if you screen grabbed it, you've got some evidence. And teach your children to block and report. So in pretty much every gaming platform and social media app, it's all pretty much the same. You click the three dots, you block, you report. But teach them how to do that. And then they're empowered. So if anybody is unkind or says something rude or shares something they don't want to see, they can get rid of that person straight away. I mentioned a moment ago about that reel, the filter reel. Someone sent something quite horrible, really quite an unpleasant message to me the other day. And I just thought, no, thank you. Block, report, gone. I didn't give it a moment's thought. I could have lingered on that and worried about it, but I didn't. I blocked them, I reported them, and I moved. Actually, I didn't report them. I just blocked them because they were just being a bit of a meanie and moved on. And I think that's a really empowering thing that we can teach our children.
Yeah, such good advice.
That's good advice that we need to take too, Laura.
Yes.
Just block and move on. Definitely.
Yeah. Block and move on.
Yeah.
Love that. Oh, this has been brilliant. There's been so much good stuff. Laura Davis, got any last minute selfish questions you want to ask for yourself?
Oh no, but I'm just going to follow and I was going to say stalk Jess then, but that's probably not a quite appropriate term. But no, it's
stalk away.
It's a constant education, isn't it? And I don't think, and we're in the industry, aren't we? We see how much social media changes on a day-to-day basis. And I guess that's worrying in itself, isn't it, as parents?
Yes.
3 years ago, when I'd have been playing around on Snapchat, there wasn't no Snap Map things. So if I was to say to my child, yes, you can go on Snapchat without having looked at it myself, I would not have heard this. I would not have known about the map thing. So it's not just about educating yourself to give your child permission to use that platform. It's about continuing to educate yourself and to be aware of the changes as well, because they change all the time.
They do. They change all the time. It is fast moving.
This has been so good, Jess. Thank you so, so much. So before we go, for anyone who's listening who wants more help, where can they find you? Where's the best place for them to connect with you so they can come and learn more?
Okay, so I have a website, which is socialjess.com. But if you follow me, if you have an Instagram account, come and follow me on Instagram, which is _socialjess. And on there, I share lots of tips and advice about keeping your children safe online. And I also, as I mentioned at the beginning, I run workshops. So I've got between now and Christmas, I've got a social media workshop, just an introduction to child safety online workshop, a gaming workshop, and then a little snappy pre-Christmas Christmas tech gifts workshop, which will be a kind of a quick half an hour. If you're getting some Christmas tech for your children, here's how to set it up safely.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's such a good idea. We'll put all the links for all of that in the show notes. So definitely go and check in with Jess and go and follow her. Thank you so much, Jess, for being our very first guest on this show. It's been brilliant.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
So you probably know other people who are worried about their kids being on social media. So send them a link to this episode, or we'd love it if you could share this on social media so more children and more parents have the tools that they need to ensure their children are safe online. I'm sure they'll be forever grateful. See you next time.